Hey listeners, today we're bringing you a bonus chat about Lunarpunk. This topic was decided on by popular vote over at our Patreon, and we're aiming to do more regular bonus chats like this every month. Patreon members will be able to vote on our topic of conversation, and the resulting bonus chat will be available exclusively to Patreon subscribers for a week or two before we upload it to our YouTube channel. You can follow us over there at Solarpunk Presents. Now, on to our bonus chat.
So the big question for today is, what is Lunarpunk? If Solarpunk is all about inspiring ourselves to start constructing a wonderful, sunny, ecologically sustainable, socially just society run on renewable sources of energy and feeding everyone via vertical farming, and if Solarpunk is all about figuring out the practicalities of bringing that about, what's Lunarpunk all about?
Well, I think it's interesting because we're sort of seeing Lunarpunk as a genre coalescing before our very eyes. So right now, if Solarpunk is a teenager, then Lunarpunk is still kind of in early elementary school. It's still kind of growing up.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah, so if Solarpunk is about all those practicalities of constructing a green, tech-based, sustainable utopian future, Lunarpunk is more about spirituality, about personal feelings, magic, and otherness that you might feel, sort of the intangible bits of the human experience.
Oh, I have so many questions. Is Lunarpunk already its own little subgenre of science fiction? Or is it a little corner pocket inside the Solarpunk bubble?
I honestly kind of wonder that too. It's really interesting to watch because it's being sort of treated as sometimes one, sometimes the other. It just kind of depends on who's talking about it. It's all very interesting to me. When I read articles about Lunarpunk, I sort of get the impression that it's very, very aesthetic driven. Kind of like the inverse of Solarpunk. So moon and stars instead of sun, night instead of day, purples and blues instead of sunflower colors, velvet gowns instead of solar panels, landscapes of dark forests that are glowing with bioluminescent mushrooms instead of cityscapes of greened up buildings housing collectivized communities, magic instead of technology, and emphasis on introvertedness that leads to individual experience as opposed to more sort of outwardly facing communal life.
Right. So Lunarpunk's writing all the poetry, huh?
Yeah.
Actually, I think, Solarpunk may be a teenager, but I think Lunarpunk is the teenager lying on its bed in its bedroom writing poetry. Sorry.
It's currently exploring who it is, It's
Okay.
plumbing the depths of its soul. It's a very important process. Stories in this genre deal with death, so those internal struggles against the values of the world versus the ethics of eco-spirituality and spirituality in general. So it's sort of like a tug of war between like what you value versus what the world values around you.
Oh, okay.
Or that's what I've seen.
That's interesting. So it's sort of a way to explore your own soul. But aside from that, what is Lunarpunk actually for, right? So if Solarpunk as you can maybe call it a subgenre of mundane science fiction, and you can also call it a social movement, and it's all about not waiting to rise from the ashes of apocalypse before building a super duper future for as much of humanity as possible. But what's Lunarpunk trying to achieve?
That's a good question. What is any genre of fiction trying to achieve?
Well, but I think Solarpunk has very clear goals.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so if Lunarpunk is this offshoot of Solarpunk, is or isn't, whatever, on some level they have to be linked, I guess. Does Lunarpunk have a goal, or is it just not that practical?
I feel like it has a goal, although neither you nor I are sort of self-identified Lunarpunk, so maybe we're just grasping in the dark at this. Yeah, like I wonder, you can make your life fit to this sort of Lunarpunk aesthetic and sort of focus on these values, but it's sort of like, to what end is that?
I know there are people who identify as Solarpunk, but are there people who identify as Lunarpunk? Is there a Lunarpunk community? Is it too soon? Or is this the sort of thing that there would never really be a Lunarpunk equivalent, right? Like there's not like a steampunk community. There's people who like to dress up as steampunk and go to, conventions or whatever, but are they a community?
I mean, like, they are a community. I've been to several fan conventions with a significant steampunk contingent at it. But I mean, I wouldn't say they're a community in the same way that Solarpunk is a community. Like, I feel like they're not working towards changing the fabric of society. And so I don't really see Lunarpunk doing that either. But I think that it does sort of address that more mystical, spiritual side of the Solarpunk equation, if it's not outright political.
Okay, so lunar punks are sort of like a goth, whereas solar punks are sort of like anarchist punks?
Oh, maybe. I
Or
mean,
maybe you had to live through the 80s to understand what I meant by that.
yeah, maybe that's before my time. I don't know. But I mean, I just said something about lunar punk being more about religion, and I realized that that's kind of a false dichotomy. Religion and politics can be very intertwined, but so far, lunar punk isn't trying to do that or be like that. I just think that it does have that potential to get political.
I somehow see lunar punk as being like Lord Byron.
How so?
And all about what was that? Sorry, I'm obviously not up on my English literature here, but that movement of poets, the
Oh,
not the
the romantic.
romantics. Was it the romantics? Yeah,
Yeah.
where they were just all about experience and sensation and emotion and
Yeah.
drama.
I mean, as I understand it, British society at that point was very much not about those things. And so that was sort of a rebellion against that sort of like stiff upper lip kind of status quo.
Future Ariel here, dropping in to say that the early 19th century Romantic movement in poetry was in contrast specifically with the strict neoclassical style of poetry, which was defined by intellect and reason.
Well, so this is interesting. I think this raises an interesting point for me, at least. Then, did lunar punk come about as in response to some sort of lack in solar punk, or in opposition to some stiff upper lipidness, or perhaps the more strictly practical, inclusive nature of solar punk?
Yeah, I don't think lunar punk is rebelling against solar punk so much. It's just like plucking out some aspects that need to be more emphasized within solar punk. So like, okay, so we've got solar punk and lunar punk. So we've got this emphasis on the moon in lunar punk, which is traditionally kind of a symbol for the subconscious. And it's sort of still a rebellion against structures, but against more traditional structures of thought. So kind of like how the romantics were rebelling against those structures of thought, which were saying that emotion, especially in men, is not okay. So lunar punk I see as still a rebellion against structures, but it's against sort of more traditional structures of thought. The way they are now, I wouldn't say solar punk represents those structures of thought, but instead the structures of thought that we're dealing with now. So for example, the structures of thought within capitalism, where I think, for example, that if I'm not being productive, then I am not a valuable member of society. And I know that that is stupid. I know that that's wrong. I know that being a valuable member of society does not rest on how much output you have. However, I've grown up in a capitalist society full of the Protestant work ethic. Idle hands are the devil's plaything. Something that really resonates within my subconscious. And so whenever I am just sitting around, I feel like a bad person, like morally, within my soul. And so I think lunar punk is really hoping to sort of,
So lunar punk is coming in saying devil's plaything doesn't sound so bad.
yeah, it's saying devil's plaything doesn't sound so bad, or even just like that dichotomy of, good and evil when it comes to how productive you are, that doesn't apply. You can live your life outside of those strictures. That's fine. And so in order for a solar punk to be, I guess, effective at changing society, lunar punk is trying to be effective at changing the people who make up society, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. So I mean, so it's interesting. So because it's solar punk, so much of it is about kind of engineering and things like harnessing energy, but then you've got this lunar punk, which is about the moon and emotions, all these sort of feminine things. And on some level, maybe it's not rebelling, but it's providing a softer side to Solarpunk, although Solarpunk's already pretty soft. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Emphasizing the traditionally feminine is not a bad thing, unless you're using it to be biologically essentialist, which we are
Oh
not.
no, anybody can be feminine. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, speaking as someone who has a degree in English, and so I am that sort of woo-woo kind of, wordy person who writes poetry. I see the value in having a space for people who aren't necessarily all engineers and scientists. Society is made up of a lot of different people.
I mean, I think plenty of Solarpunks write poetry, but I feel like Lunarpunks would write very different poetry than Solarpunks somehow. And that Solarpunk art and Lunarpunk art would look very different as well.
Yeah, I mean, different, but not necessarily like opposed.
Like maybe Lunarpunk is trying to figure out what Solarpunk would feel like. I don't know if it was, moody. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm more and more drawn to that interpretation of Lunarpunk as sort of just the other side of the Solarpunk coin. Like it complements Solarpunk. It's not its own genre.
Okay, it's the where's what Solarpunk gets up to in the shadows? No, wait, that was a movie about vampires. Never mind. So then who are the Lunarpunks? And we had all sorts. We had a really strong interest in talking about Lunarpunk. Like we gave people a choice between like cyberpunk and I don't know what else was it, steampunk or whatever. And people are like Lunarpunk. So what is it that's resonating with people?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I just think Lunarpunk is an unknown quantity. And so the more people who are explicitly talking about Lunarpunk, the more the genre gets defined. And so people are naturally curious.
Okay. Maybe people also just like things that glow in the dark.
I mean, there's that too. I like things that glow in the dark.
I mean, it is cool. Yeah.
We can all agree on that. There are Solarpunks who are necessarily more spiritual and need to see that kind of reflection of deep spirituality and experience transcendence. And I'm not going to say that doesn't fit within the Solarpunk container.
But it's not the main focus by any means.
It's not the main focus. Whereas like Lunarpunk, I think, is...
I mean, Solarpunk's like, hand me the hammer, right?
Yeah, Lunarpunk is a different lens. It's a different way of seeing sort of the gains of Solarpunk and a different way of seeing the problems that Solarpunk has to deal with, and a different way of seeing sort of the values of Solarpunk.
Yeah, I don't know. I also, I mean, one of the, I wouldn't say problems, but one of the things I have about Solarpunk is that everyone's, they're so nice to each other and they're so optimistic. And, some of us have a darkness in our soul and just want to roll our eyes sometimes at all of this. Yeah, let's all be a community. Like, So for me, yeah, I mean, of course, I could see Lunarpunks also being a bit of a community and all of that, but a community of people who are misfits, even though I bet a lot of Solarpunks feel like they don't fit into society, but I think it's different for Lunarpunks. It's a different kind of being a misfit. And another thing I see about Solarpunk is that it wants things like queerness not to be queer, just to become something that's just so ordinary you don't even notice it anymore. But, maybe it's actually kind of nice to have a space where it's cool to be queer and it's exotic and exciting and a little bit dangerous, and that is more of Lunarpunk.
Get to shine a light, a bioluminescent light on it, like and celebrate it.
Yeah. And whereas Solarpunk, when it celebrates that, it's celebrating that it's okay, right? But this is different than just being okay somehow. This is like, it's like embracing the weirdness of it.
Yeah. I like
because Solarpunk just isn't weird, right? It's full of sunflowers. It's not weird,
Some people think that is deeply weird. I'm just saying. But
it would be a different kind of weird, It's not a queer weird. It's not a purple weird. It's not a I have to wear a velvet gown kind of
not the weird of that cousin who makes a really off-color joke at someone's funeral.
Yeah, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really grim humor kind of thing.
And I feel like, okay, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I feel like the people who would like Lunarpunk were probably read fantasy as opposed to sci-fi. would be my guess. Do you think so?
I mean, I don't want to make broad generalizations, but fantasy does tend to have a lot more poetic language per se, more escapism maybe. So I think that Lunarpunk is the sort of philosopher druid of the Solarpunk movement. It sort of shines a light on those sort of guiding values and the ethics and the beliefs that people hold. And like I said, those sort of, intangible, squidgy things that we can't really take a hammer to, if that makes any sense.
You can't construct something, tangible out of it.
Well, I mean, like you can like build a church, I guess, but churches are not religion.
But that still takes the hammer part of it, right? So
yeah. I do recommend reading the Solarpunk Druid blog to our listeners. The Solarpunk Station blog also. They've had a recent series of guest posts on Solarpunk spirituality, and I guess that crosses over into Lunarpunk. And look out for my interview with Navarre Bartz, who is Solarpunk Station's author.
Okay, yeah, no, that would be interesting because I could envision a lot of types of Solarpunk spirituality that I wouldn't classify as Lunarpunk. But maybe that's just because I feel like there needs to be a dark thread running through Lunarpunk.
Yeah. I think it definitely has that potential. I see Lunarpunk, it's not all just stuff that...
dancing under the full moon that kind of stuff. It's
not all celebration. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not all celebration. I see it as sort of anti-capitalist in the way that self-care is anti-capitalist, sort of in the sense of, okay, I'm going to quote something, I'm sorry. But Audre Lorde, she wrote, quote, "I had to examine in my dreams as well as in my immune function tests the devastating effects of overextension." Just a little aside here. She was, like being diagnosed with something. Back to the quote. "So overextending myself is not stretching myself. I had to accept how difficult it is to monitor that difference. Necessary for me as cutting down on sugar. Crucial. Physically, psychically, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." Unquote. So self-care these days is basically shorthand for buy stuff to make you feel better. It's become an industry, right? But Lorde's meaning is really not that. So it's, instead of the capitalist drive to work, resting. Instead of the beauty standard, just eat good food and nourishing food often, and don't ascribe any sort of morals to it. Instead of productivity, creativity. Write that poem, even though it's some time in your day, right? That you could maybe be using to do chores. Instead of rushing, taking things slow and observing the living world around you.
Oh, and listening to the kitty cats.
Yeah. Listen to the sounds of nature.
Exactly. The lion's roar.
Yeah. So instead of valuing the hustle, value connection instead. There's an essay by Kathleen Newman Bremang on Refinery 29 called Reclaiming Audre Lorde's Radical Self-Care. Lunarpunk to me just kind of embodies that. And in that sense, is sort of Solarpunk's twin in revolutionizing the status quo by actually like valuing ourselves, not just throwing money at the problem.
Yeah, weird. Okay, sorry. This totally clashes with my idea of Lunarpunk as Lord Byron.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say Lord Byron was indulging in self-care, though.
Although he was indulging in something, anyway.
He was
indulging in indulgence
in that self-care. I mean, like, I think he didn't have to do anything. He just had money. He was one of those sorts of people. And so he could just take a day off. Regardless, though.
Sorry. Sorry. That just struck me as funny, is the thought of Lord Byron taking a day off. I mean, did he do anything but have days off? I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, he took a day off. Well, he took more than a day off. He took
all the days off.
Yeah.
That's kind of how he comes across in the movie about Mary Shelley that came out a couple years ago.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen it? No, it's all right. It was all right.
Anyways.
So does Lunarpunk specifically address one of the central contradictions of Solarpunk, which is that punks don't like rules, but utopian communities are full of them, and, full of the rigid self-policing that goes along with that. And, sort of likewise, just because anarchists don't believe in the authority of the state, it doesn't mean that anarchist collectives don't have rigid rules for the behavior of their members, potentially at the expense of individual expression. But lunarpunks, they don't really have rules.
Yeah, I mean, like I see Lunarpunks as sort of reactive rather than active, like
Or, I don't know, reactive might be putting it strongly. They're kind of diaphanous, like a ghost just floating around between the mushrooms. I don't know.
I don't want to say like it's non-committal, but I think it's
Fluid.
again, it values things that either like in Solarpunk are there, just not like they need a spotlight shone on them, and Lunarpunk provides that, or they value things that are directly in contradiction to the status quo that we have today. That's my sense of it anyway. I don't think it addresses that central contradiction, but I have lots of thoughts about utopias and dystopias and
Well,
stuff. That's another podcast.
That is many other podcasts, I think. Okay, well, but talking about podcasts, so I was wondering if we had a Lunarpunk podcast called perhaps Lunarpunk Dreams.
Oh, I like that.
What sorts of topics would we cover? I mean, because we're not a fiction podcast, we're a nonfiction podcast, and I think we definitely, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we definitely wouldn't be interviewing people about more technological things like distributed production or building climate resilience or the nitty-gritty of co-housing. Or even, would we even be talking about AI and art? I don't even know.
I mean, there is a very definite artistic thread that runs throughout Lunarpunk. So I feel like that would be a conversation that we would probably have, but maybe we would be talking about different things and asking different questions.
Yeah, like what cool stuff could you do with AI, maybe? Or
maybe, who knows?
And what, our climate grief episode where you talked to the climate grief chaplain, would that fall under Lunarpunk, or was that still strictly Solarpunk?
I think that sort of crosses over into Lunarpunk, definitely. I would probably say, like if we had our Lunarpunk Dreams podcast, we'd probably interview like religious people from diverse faith traditions about basically how climate change is kind of shaking their faith and how they deal with that, or not shaking their faith, or how they're addressing it. And it would be sort of along those lines as well. And so, I mean, we'd also dig a little bit into the hard sciences with maybe some interviews with archaeologists and anthropologists talking about what we know about different systems of belief throughout history, like the history of paganism, the history of Wicca, like all of these things, because culture is very entwined with belief. And, it's only in sort of this postmodern era where I think it's become decoupled in certain places, although that might just be my presentism blinders talking. There might have been other civilizations and cultures under the sun that did that long ago, but I don't know about it. Yeah. You said poetry workshops. I think that would be a great idea. I like that idea.
I didn't know you were so into poetry.
Yeah.
You will have to read out some of your poems someday to us.
No, I was very into poetry when I was younger because I was writing it when I was younger, and as such, it is mostly juvenilia. Certainly not Solarpunk.
Ah, right. But so it's sort of, so would Lunarpunk be writing like the poem that Winona Ryder's character was reading out loud in Beetlejuice? How does it go? Something like, I'm alone.
I've never seen it.
I am so very alone. Oh, but Beetlejuice would be very, very Lunarpunk.
Oh, really?
I feel like it would be Lunarpunk. I mean, I guess so. I probably haven't seen it in 30 years, but it's very dark and purple. It's got ghosts in it. It's got a goth in it. It's got poetry in it.
I have heard that it has lots of wicked humor in it, which I think that Lunarpunk, I don't see a whole lot of Lunarpunk humor in the movie.
Well, okay, so I don't think Beetlejuice is actually Lunarpunk, but it's got the same vibes going on.
Okay.
Well, you'll have to watch it and maybe you can correct me. But wait, hang on. What did you just say about Lunarpunk and humor?
Oh, I said I haven't seen a whole lot of Lunarpunk humor for that matter, I haven't seen a whole lot of Solarpunk humor, although I've seen comedians using climate change jokes and stuff to sort of raise awareness about climate change. It's all very punching up and not punching down, which is quite nice. But I also think that for so long, even thinking about like the things that Solarpunk promotes, so like all of these things like gender equality and climate resilience and anti-racism and stuff like that, these are all hot button political issues for some people who take it very seriously. And so
are kind of serious issues. I mean, I think it would be hard to joke about them without.
Yeah, you have to have a certain level of skill to do that, I think.
And let's face it, most of us don't.
Yeah, and most of us don't. And I mean, like, the more I listen to and watch stand-up, the more I realize how difficult being a comedian is. Because a lot of the stand-up comedians that I like the most do deal with these heavy issues, but they provide catharsis for you. You can see something terrible and laugh at it. And like I said, they're punching up and not punching down on the victims of these terrible things, but instead on the systems that make those terrible things possible.
So I think it's very, very hard to write humor into stories.
Oh,
you have to be very, very, very good to pull it off.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, yeah. Okay. So maybe humor is a bit of a red herring here at the moment. Yeah. It's too soon.
Yeah, I think
too soon.
As we said, if it's a very young movement, I think once it matures a little bit, it'll get a little bit more humor or approaching humor, but it needs to grow up a bit.
Okay.
I don't know. That's just my sense. Well, I was going to bring it back to what we would talk about in Lunarpunk Dreams, just because we sort of came up with a whole list of topics, and I see that you put, psychedelics, tarot cards.
Okay. Then let me ask my next question then. Okay. So I'm kind of also thinking that maybe we would have episodes about making pottery or other arts and crafts, and maybe other things that connect people to culture, I guess, because you'd be talking a lot here about culture and history and anthropology and archaeology and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, things like how people sort of express themselves and express their sort of cultural heritage through different.
Well, cultural heritage to me feels solarpunk. I don't really feel like Lunarpunk's about cultural heritage.
I guess sort of the individual interpretation of cultural heritage, maybe how it impacts on the individual, possibly.
So, I mean, I really feel like Lunarpunk is really witchy, and there's an awful lot of culture and heritage that isn't witchy at all. And and that there are people who would be like, how dare you call my culture witchy, who would be kind of offended by that. And so all that kind of stuff, all the stuff that you have to take seriously and really respect, kind of for me fits on the solarpunk side.
Oh, interesting.
Whereas the stuff that's weird gets to be on the lunarpunk side.
Okay. So
and the stuff where people are like, it's weird and I'm so proud of that, that goes on the lunarpunk side.
Okay. So yeah, like we said, Lunarpunk's just kind of a celebration more than anything of weirdness, of liking things that aren't, like in the daylight.
Yeah.
So
I guess that's where so there's a whole lot of spirituality and religion and culture and stuff like that to me that's solarpunk. And it's not lunarpunk.
I mean, I'm tempted to dichotomize and say, it's a split between public and private. So solarpunk is public and lunarpunk is private, but I don't think it's that simple. I think it's more complicated. I think a lot of the topics that we were brainstorming for Lunarpunk Dreams actually cross over with Solarpunk, to be honest. Like, for example, we were thinking that, we could get someone to talk about mushrooms. And I mean, I'd love to interview someone on the Solarpunk podcast about the ins and outs of mushroom cultivation or foraging. I think that's in both worlds,
I suppose most of these things would be, but I'm sort of thinking maybe but what about tarot cards? Would you talk about that in the Solarpunk podcast, or is that really strictly Lunarpunk?
I don't know. I think talking about tarot and the history of it, and tarot itself is more lunar punk, whereas talking to someone who uses tarot in their work, maybe as a therapist or something like that, would be solar punk.
Okay.
I don't know. That's how it feels to me in my
Hmm.
brain. I don't know if that's the truth of the matter, but yeah, that is so interesting.
Yeah, no, but I like that dividing line. That makes sense to me.
Okay, well, I think that about sums it up for us. We're not really still sure what exactly lunar punk is, but
But we certainly have opinions on
yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, I mean, like solar punk comes in all kinds of different varieties of flavors because humans come in all different varieties of flavors. Everybody's different. Some are more politically active solar punks, some are more, community solar punks, some like, like the party organizers. Or the people who are, protesting rent evictions and advocating for rent control. And then some like to create a space for emphasizing this spiritual and tangible and personal sort of things and developing yourself. And I think that's kind of ultimately what underlies the lunar punk impulse and maybe the cool aesthetic too. But I also think it has the potential to go a lot deeper than just aesthetic. Yeah, I don't know. It's still, like we said, it's just kind of a growing movement, and so we'll keep an eye on it and watch to find out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what people do with it. That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And on that note, thanks very much for
Yay!
listening, everybody.
Yeah, we made it to the end. Woo! Okay.
Yeah. What do you think about lunar punk? Is this something that you have expertise in or opinions on? Because we surely do not have expertise, but we have so many opinions, and we would love to hear from you. If you know some things that maybe we did not include, if you want to point out some stuff that maybe didn't make it into our conversation, we'd love to learn more and look forward to reading that.